one I described yesterday in Sana'a. There is a series of tests and a series of tests which also served to train the surveyors. In this case, the training of surveyors was much easier because the surveyors were people already trained. They were young architects from Welfare Association and RIWAC, which had already carried out surveys on historic cities. There were a number of surveyors which I took from Italy, my collaborators, so there were people more or less trained. But nevertheless, even if surveyors are trained, they have to be trained to the specific site. So they have trained to address a specific problem that may arise, that may be present in every site. For instance, in the case of Jerusalem, one big problem was how to deal with the buildings overlapped one to each other. The first two floors were belonging to a building and were accessible from the lower road, for instance, and the other two floors above were accessible from the road above uphill, and they belong to another building. So how to deal with that? Particularly the problem when we use GIS is important because the shape of the building is the same, but the same shape refer to different records. So there is a technical problem to solve, how to name the two buildings and so on. Other problems may come from the interpretation, for instance, of some special aspects. The dating of the building, for instance. Here in Jerusalem it was important because it was asked specifically, to select project profiles which are significant representative of the different periods. The dating of the building is essential, for instance, according to the Jordan and both the Jordan and the Israeli legislation. So, how to date a building which has been transformed several times from Roman times up to the 19th century? It's not an easy issue, and we indeed put in the database all the dates of the most significant transformation of the building. So you have a building which have 3, 4 possible different dates. So that it appears in all the thematic maps which refer to those different periods. Another problem was about the name of the building. As I told you yesterday, you can see that here in the survey form, well, the first part is like in Sana'a, the ID number, the GIS, the date of survey, the name of surveyor. Then immediately there is the field for the name of the complex. 6 names, 6 possible answers. Because we realized in the end that the same building can have up to 6 different names in different languages, according to the community that use that building or that recognize that building as belonging to their culture. I made you the examples of the Haram Sharif, that is Temple Mount for the Jewish and the Moriah Mount for the Christian. But then within the Haram Sharif there are buildings or sabils or single elements which has the gates. The gates has 4 or 5 names according to Jewish, Arab, French, German, Italian. So it's a mess. Then, anyway, we had a survey form for the complex. So the compounds, let's say, In the survey form of the complex, we asked to identify all the items of the complex which are later on surveyed individually, you know. Then any residential compound as a number, all the buildings as a number with their identity of the number of the GIS, the same for the part of the building, and so on and so on and so on. So the compound is, has been surveyed on its own, but also in the survey of the compounds are identified all the individual objects that are being surveyed and inventoried as individual objects, let's say. Well, the building or part of building survey sheet includes the identification of the typology. Here there is a very long list, and contrary to what I told you yesterday, you have to avoid other. In the end, we were forced to add a special voice other, because at the end of the story, you see there is a very long list of possible typologies. We realized that there were other possibilities, but especially because of the language, you know. And it was impossible to say to our Palestinian or Israeli friends, listen, what you call like this, it is exactly what it calls in the other way. No. No, because in Yeshua is not exactly like the Zawiya. I understand. One is Jewish, the other one is Arab. One is in Yeshua, you learn Talmud or the Kabbalah, and in the Zawiya you study the Quran. I understand that the Quran is not, but I mean, the function of the building is a place where some notion is transmitted. To me, is the same. No, but so anyway, it was impossible to put Zawiya and Yeshua, you know, in the same category. So there are two different typologies. Typology, the name, historic period. I don't think that there is much. I think that everything is clear for you. But for the historic period also there were problems and discussion, because Jewish has to make the distinction between pre-Roman, Roman Herodian, and post-Herodian. You know, because post-Herodian is after the destruction of the temple, and so for them the world has changed after the destruction of the temple. Even if Romans has continued to build the building the same way before and after, but for them, before and after is a crucial story. This is just to say that even some things like historic period that can be described with a number, so something that to me may be objective. When you deal with a subject which has such a strong cultural and symbolic significance, even number can have a different meaning. So, for Jewish, it was essential to know if that Roman remain was before or after Herod, for instance. You know? And you cannot neglect, you know, these aspects, because heritage, in the end, you discover, is just a matter of interpretation. It's just a matter of meanings, of symbols. Heritage and the heritage value is a value which depends on who decides that this building is heritage. It's exactly your case of the archaeological remains. They are important for you, for me, for them, but probably these are just stones for the others, you know. So when is
we will discuss this later on.
No, but I mean, what is important is the meaning of these stones, you know, and because this is really essential, you know, behind and beyond any scientific or cultural meaning. So, then again, the floor number, it was a difficult problem for the reason I told you before. So we decided to put the number of floor, but also to add a field with the definition of the level to which the number of floor refers. If it is at street level, or above the street level, or below the street level. The type of roof, it's very important. Pitch roof, hip roof, which is usually used in many Christian buildings, or the flat roof, or dome roof, or mixed, you know, which is typical of the different building typologies, not functional typologies, but building typologies. And then, well, the roof conditions, the main materials of the structure, the dressing structure. I mean, this is very important. You know, Jerusalem is a city built in stone. It's a stone city indeed. And this was enhanced by the recent regulation during the British Mandate period. They made mandatory, you know, to build all the buildings in stone, or at least to cover even the modern, recent buildings out of stone, with a typical Jerusalem stone. So, the way of treating, dressing the stone is very much representative of the different periods, you know, and very much reflects, you know, the kind of importance of the building. So here there are three main types of stone dressing that may be found, and also the mortar bed joints, because these three is fundamental in defining the appearance of the building. For instance, in Jerusalem, there is a very interesting contemporary architecture of rationalist period, you know, not as much in the old city, but in the new city, yes. And it's quite ironical to see that these very often European architects, you know, coming from Bauhaus, or masters of rationalism, European rationalism, like Mendelssohn, for instance, which in Europe were theorists, you know, of the clean, white, the smooth facade, and so on. They were obliged to build with stone. And so you find this rationalist, German, perfect architecture that, in spite of being, of having a very smooth and continuous rendering, white rendering, the so-called Bauhaus architecture, is made out of stone. It's very, very interesting. The same architects in Tel Aviv were not obliged to use the stone, and they built exactly the same kind of buildings they were building in Germany, you know. Well, anyway, the stone is a part, is a fundamental, not only a building material, but it's an element which really determines, you know, the appearance of the building. So it is important to know what kind of stone dressing the building presents. And then other elements which refer to the structural risk I've been talking about, the slope of the low-building walls, the crack patterns, and here some possible answers were given, you know, because the logic, I remember, is always the same. If you want to put data into the GIS, you have to have codified answers, you know. The codification could have been different, and this codification has been reached, has been decided, has been stated after many tests and after many, which are absolutely essential. The rest is quite the same that we have seen yesterday in Sana'a as for the general structural condition, the overall state of conservation. Of course, the architectural elements we were looking at are not the same of Sana'a. They are much more simple because the architecture of Jerusalem is less rich, for instance, in architectural and added elements than the one of Sana'a. Then, what is important here, the position of the building with reference to the streets and to the other buildings, the presence of vertical or horizontal additions, the state of use, if it is used, partially used, not used, and so on, the functions of the building, the presence of incompatible activities, and the kind of accessibility. This is something to what the Israeli authorities were particularly interested and particularly demanding, because they have a special law for disabled people, and they wanted to know if the building was accessible or not to disabled people. We added to that, okay, for disabled people access, if it is yes or not, but also we were very much worried about the presence of the police, for instance, or the army, which could make the access to a building perfectly accessible to disabled people, but impossible for everybody, you know, because the army is there. Me and my surveyors were kept several times by the police, you know, because they were asking, what are you doing, what is your purpose, and very luckily I had good telephone numbers, and I could get rid of the police or the army. But you, perhaps, if you didn't have this telephone number, probably you would have spent a few days in a jail, for instance. So, even if the access is physically, functionally possible, there are other reasons that may make the access impossible. So, in the end, our Israeli colleagues agreed with us that so very diplomatically we have put impossible or restricted or free without any other specification, but everybody knows that the access, I don't know, to some buildings is impossible because the army is there. The access to some wonderful madrasa next to the Arab Sharif is impossible because this madrasa is used by the police or by the army, or used as a temporary prison, are used as a temporary prison, you know, for the hooligan, they call it, like the guys in the stadium. I mean, the boys that simply, when they see an Israeli soldier, they make joke, or they make joke of him, or yes, because this is the Palestinian attitude, or they irritate to, in some way, you know, the soldier, and the soldier can take the guy and put him in a jail for a few months, like this. So, the question of accessibility, I think it is very important and needed to be defined in every different case, you know, because if you are thinking of a conservation plan, or if you are thinking of, if we are thinking of a program of rehabilitation, the question, the matter of accessibility, which could also mean visual accessibility, is extremely important. We did different types of survey form for different categories. These forms are similar, for instance, but in the case of special features, for instance, of course, the typology is different than from the buildings. but all the rest remains more or less the same. For the archaeological remain, for different technical, diplomatic, and political reasons, we decided that the typology cannot be determined, codified, but needed a narrative description. So in this case, it's clear that the archaeological remain may appear in our thematic maps only as archaeological area, but not with the specification of the typology. In other terms, you cannot ask the system, tell me to make a query about the different possible types of the archaeological site. The only thing that make possible the distinction, of archaeological site is the historic period. Again, like in the case of buildings, we may have an archaeological site with a different historic period, because there is an overlapping of different remains. Even here you see the kind of diplomatic story. Since we negotiated and we decided not to put in the system the underground archaeological remains, there are some, Jewish are very nice in this kind of discussion. Well, but there are some sites which are below the level, which are not underground, but are just below the level of the street. Okay, I agree, but I don't want to put in the system any kind of archaeological remain which is not visible from the street or where else. Now, what you see, the Christians have a lot of underground sites. They are underground because they are excavated. I mean, they are below the level of the normal level of the ground. But they are not underground because they are covered. I mean, this kind of discussion. And I think that everywhere, there are these kind of discussions that have to be negotiated and decided before the survey form is finalized and before the survey of your inventory. So, I would stop here with the description of this survey sheet. But again, since your exercise, we will discuss it together with Cristina Iamandi, and then she will explain more in detail the kind of exercise you have to do, should be preparation of field survey, let's say, of a survey sheet, to make the inventory of your city, just as an exercise, not to make the inventory, but just to take a block, let's say, with 10 houses, 50 houses in Orada, and I don't see here the other people. You will work, 2 or 3 of you, you will discuss it together, you will be asked to prepare a survey sheet to discuss with us the survey sheet via internet with a long distance connection, and then once the survey sheet will be established, to make the inventory of 10, 15 buildings in a block, just as an exercise. Me personally, I wouldn't mind if more groups works on the same block. Because it will be interesting to see the differences, not because there are good surveyors, bad surveyors, but because in many cases, the survey requires an evaluation, and the evaluation can be subjective, even if you give very strict criteria. This is the world. I mean, very likely all of us are different from each other. So we can find a common ground, hopefully, but the differences remain, and so we have to be able to deal with the difference. What is important is that we agree on what is on what is the common ground, and we agree that your archaeological Roman remains, for instance, should be preserved, you know, and not covered by new highways. No, but this is just an example. I mean, but we will talk. I hope that Christina is coming soon, and so we can go back to this discussion. But let me tell you that what I showed you yesterday and today are survey sheets that, again, are have been structured and conceived for the GIS. I would like to show you very fast. I don't know if I have it here. Yes. The survey sheet that are normally used, in Italy. They are normally used in Italy for the inventory in the A zone, the zone of the historic settlements that all the plans have to. I'm sorry, this is the explanation. All the plans that have to be, the plans have to identify the historic settlements and have to provide a detailed regulation for historic centers, where each building is given a category of intervention. This is the way. Here I have two documents. This is a typical survey sheet that is not intended to be put in the GIS. That's the problem. This is a survey sheet that has to be done for every building, and that has to be attached to all the documentation of the master plan. In Italy, master plans are, I don't know, you need a truck normally to move all the documents that form a master plan. Because all the surveys, all the building surveys are part of the documentation of the master plan, are official documents, so it has to be on paper. And I think that in France it is the same. This reflects a legislation of 78, and 78 there were no GIS and so on. Of course, now the municipality do the GIS from this, let's say, survey sheet. They make the simplified, and they have their own database where these data are reported in a form that can be used with the GIS. But, for instance, in the case, this is the case of the master plan I showed you yesterday. I did of a small city next to Bologna. It is a historic city of the 12th century, and every building is identified by the address and the cadastral map. So the number of the cadastral map, the sheet, and the number of the plot. This is something that cannot be put in GIS. I mean, it's a documentation which is necessarily narrative, you know. In the GIS, the building has to have, as I explained to you yesterday, an ID number which is readable by the system. It should be a number, should be a name, should be, but you cannot have as an address Corso Ercole Primo Veste number 4. This is my address. That doesn't make any sense. And even the number of the sheet of the cadastral map, it depends, you know, you have a lot of buildings in that. It's not, or even the number of mappale, you can have many buildings in the same plot. Or you can have many plots that have the same number, depending on because they have the same owner, you know. So, it's a mess. It's difficult to identify in a GIS system a building like this. Then you have to put one or two photos of the building. Well, okay. Then you have to put a map in scale 1 to 200 of the building. Well, these are documents that can be attached, you know, to the database record. Then, well, there is a section concerning the functional and dimensional character of a building, the number of stories, the building height in meter, the floor surface, the volume, and here there are numbers that I'm unable to explain in English because they very much depend on the Italian building regulations, which is very complicated. Let's say that one is the surface of the plot, but the plot surface, but without considering all the parts of the plot which may be of public use, for instance, superficie fungiale. Then there is the ratio of plot occupation, that is the relationship between the surface occupied by the building and the surface of the plot. And of course the ratio of occupation, the report. Then these are all the unità immobiliari. These are all the ownership units which may be present in a building. For instance, in the case of an apartment block, you may have a building with, let's say, 8 apartments, with 8 different owners, with 2 different owners and that. So you have to put here all the unità immobiliari, let's say, all the ownership, all the properties, let's say, within the building, to list it and put the surface, the volume, the kind of functions, the kind of land use, the number of inhabitants, or the number of workers, you know, for every property within the building, and also the tenure. I mean, if it's for rent, if it is owner, or if it's someone who has the use of the property but is not owner. These are all juridical terms. Then the surface and the volume, the total surface and volume of which are permanently occupied or temporarily occupied. Then you have the floor surface and the volume, and then the same for the surface and volumes of which are not occupied or which are empty at the moment of the survey. That's why the date of the survey is very important, because the condition of a building can vary in the time, you know. Then land use at the ground floor and the ground landscaping of the open areas, gardens or courtyard or whatever. The different type of, if there is a garden, or if it is an orchard, or if it's just a courtyard, or a storage area, or parking, or other possible uses. Then the parking. Parking is very important. Parking uncovered, I mean open air, or with a shelter, or with a garage, and or underground or whatever. Because in Italy, all the plans have to provide the rules concerning parking. There is a national law, and based on this national law, in every plan we have to put the square meter that have to be given for parking for every inhabitant, relationship of the inhabitants, with the distinction between public parkings and private parking. This in Italy is absolutely mandatory, and this is a very important. So, in the case of historic centers, you may have exceptions. I mean, you're not obliged to provide new parking, additional parking, in the case of restoration or rehabilitation, because the plan is supposed to provide the additional parking which may be necessary due to an increase of inhabitants, or, which is more important, to the increase of workers and increase of activities in the area. This parking should be given in proximity next to the historic center, as near as possible outside of the perimeter of the historic center. So this is a part of the, let's say, in Italy we have a real problem of accountability of a master plan. A master plan, beyond and behind, all the principles, the vision, and so on, it's a huge machine for accountants. You have really to count, to measure. It's a problem of relationship, of ratio, between parking inhabitants, and it may varies a lot according to the different kind of land use. I don't want to go into the detail, but all these numbers are necessary, because otherwise the plan is not approved by the region, it's not approved by the competent authorities. It has to fulfill all the requirements of the different laws, regulations, and so on, in terms of standards, in terms of number. Then, well, there is another part which concerns the typology. Here is a typology Italian style. There is a kind of typological models which is reflected in a building. For instance, if it is a palace, or palazzetto, let's say a small palace, or row houses, or block buildings, or shelters, or industrial shelters, or the building period of construction, which is usually in Italy we have usually in most regions a very rich historical cartography. So usually it's possible to see if a building existed at a certain date, and the different historic stages we put in this part of the survey, it refers to the maps, to the cartography we have. In the case of this city, we have maps. You see every 40 years, very detailed cadastral maps of the Napoleon period, which are very, very good. Unfortunately, not very likely for them, but there was not the Austrian cadastre, because that region was not occupied by Austria. But we have the post-unity cadastral maps and so on. So we have a lot of maps, and we can provide a quite accurate definition of the period of construction of each building. Then we had the possibility, due to the existing of very detailed map of 1924, very detailed, which also included the plan, the inner plan of some important buildings. We had the possibility to see the transformations, to check the transformation of each building with comparison to the date, state of conservation and maintenance, with a distinction between roof, vertical structure, horizontal structure, staircases, fencing, and an overall evaluation. State of conservation of the materials of the fittings and of the finishes, the different finishes. Hygienic condition, which included the level of pollution which to which the building is subject if there is acoustic pollution or atmospheric pollution. This is due to the fact that the master plan should integrate, measure to control this type of pollution, and also the soil pollution due to the wastes or to the, what do you say, to the release of liquids, you know, for instance. This is very crucial, and so in the survey we have to make an assessment of the pollutions which are produced from outside the buildings, but that the building is suffering, you know, from outside, and the pollutions which are produced within the building. So, just to make a case, this small city is in a region which is very famous for many things, but also for ham and many pigs products, let's say. In that region, there are 8 million of pigs. 1.5 pigs per inhabitant, more or less. And they have, pigs are an industry in Emilia-Romagna. But as an industry, it's an extremely polluting industry, you know, extremely, and there are very severe regulations concerning the control of the soil pollution which is due to this industry. So in the survey, for instance, we have to assess if there are, if this building produced soil pollution, because you may have 5 pigs run through the courtyard, you know, that are more polluting than 2 trucks or that a service station, you know. Then the last part of the survey form is dedicated to the existing constraints and prescription which may be entailed by national law, regional law, or previous plans, or previous master plans. So, for instance, here the reference is given to 2 laws of 39, which are Italian laws to classify the building, heritage buildings of national interest, or heritage or landscape sites of heritage interest. And well, then now there are even some regional laws for that, and so on. So that's it. You can see that the content is not very different from the other ones. I mean, it's different in the sense that this kind of survey is part of the implementation of a plan that has to reflect and has to comply with a different legislation, particularly with different legislation, and which has to be approved based on the compliance with this legislation. But apart from this, what is the point? Is that many of these information are difficult to be entered in the GIS system. Well, we made, well, in reality, when we made this plan, we didn't use a GIS, but we used in principle something which is similar to the GIS, an Excel sheet, you know, and a database. Indeed, this survey form is designed to be more or less, it could be to a certain extent entered in a database. But for instance, there is not an essential element of a survey form for a database, which is the ID number, for instance. And also the attached documentation has to be, in reality, it cannot be put, well, now yes, it can be. Then there are some narrative or written elements, like, for instance, well, the number of stories, 1, 2, 3, 4, this is simple, we can codify, but the building height cannot be codified unless you prepare in the database cases for building 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, until 40, I don't know. Each possible building height has to have a case to be ticked, you know, or even the surface. You cannot leave a free number, but you have to put 0 to 30 square meter, 30 to 50 square meter, 50 to 70 square meter, and then you tick, you know, the category which fits to your building units, for instance, and so on. So these are in this survey form, there are some answers which are free. So if you want to enter the data in the database, you cannot add answers which are free. All the possible answers have to be forecast, codified, and so on. Or otherwise, this data and this information can be attached as a separate information, as a narrative information, or as a graphic attachment to your survey, but it cannot be used, for instance, to produce the thematic maps that I showed you before. Here, the thematic maps at the time were made by hand, you know. I don't know, we used to do 4 or 5 thematic maps that were used for the documentation of the master plan, and there were, usually we did like that. There were 4 or 5 draftsmen with 4 or 5 base maps, you know, white maps, each one with its sets of pencils or colored, and one was saying building 1, conditions good, functions 3, and so the one who was drafting the map of functions was using the color for 1. The guys who were doing now. It was even fun, but there were a lot of mistakes and so on. Now you do, once you do, you have your GIS, your database, and your base map, you click, I want to see thematic maps of the function, you can have 3 maps in 20 seconds. The content is the same, it's much easier to do it. But it requires much more attention, and it requires, I would say, a lot of pre-cooked stuff. You know, you have to prepare it before. You cannot have surprise. If you have surprise, you are lost. And what? This is the IT technologies, you know, which is fine. Good, but which is stupid, unfortunately. It's not able to understand like a person, you know, if what you are doing is right or wrong. You know in the end if it is right or wrong. But you have to, that's why, you know, an inventory to be entered in a GIS has to be extremely carefully prepared. So, to work, we will ask you to do, you know, to prepare your survey form, a very simple one. On the one hand, it should be based on the identification of the possible issues that should be documented by your survey. And I suppose that the building height is something that is important, is conventional. That's the first thing you do. I would suggest to consider as a parameter for the building height the number of stories. Or else, because the exact measure of the building height cannot be entered in a GIS system. Unless you make a very complicated survey sheet, you know, the structure of the database should include, I don't know, 30 possible answers for the building height. 1 meter, 2 meters, 3 meters, 33 meters, 45 meters, which is impossible. So the building height could be enough, or at least if you want, I don't know, for instance, the synagogue or the church is 1 story, yes. Doesn't make any sense to put it, you know, as a building of 1 story. It's better to put it as a special building, you know, or in the issue, in the item building height, you can put special building. So you know that this building, for that building, it doesn't make any sense to put the building height. Or else, you can do something smarter, like, for instance, let's say, you put building height threshold of building heights which may correspond to different number of stories. For instance, you can put 0, 5 meter, these are the buildings of 1 story. And you have a lot of 1-story buildings here in Norada, plus the basement, probably 6 meters, or something like that. Then you can put another class of building height which may be 6 to 10 meters. These are the 2-story buildings. Or, I don't know, something like that. And then you can put more than 20 meters. We think that the buildings which are more than 20 meters are the church, the theater, the synagogues, a few other apartment blocks and so on. So you can invent something like that. But the point is that if you think of a survey sheet, survey form for GIS, you have to be aware of the possible answer, you know, and the possible fields to be filled in your database. That's the function is more or less established. You can take no matter what kind of. But again, you have to be careful because you may have here in Norada some buildings which are linked to some special functions. I don't know, and so perhaps this is worth to be documented. So the exercise would consist in the preparation of a survey sheet. I can give you all these examples I show you. I have put in the folder even other examples of those sheets I have done in many cases. Most of them are in English, some of them are in French. I don't want to lose too much time. Then, Christina, most of all, will give you.
Do you have you can provide a field one, a form field with qualification samples as well, because if it's black, you know, if it's black, we have no reference to how looks a sample of qualification, for example.
No, all these are examples that I give you that you can use.
At least one B field to have a view how it looks like.
You see, that's what I'm saying. If you take, for instance, the survey sheet I show you now, the one we use in the sheet,
okay,
it would be almost useless here in Norada.
Yeah, no, just as a view of.
Listen, you take this and you go around, and you will see. You will see that, unfortunately, it is in Italian. Christina will give you.
We will translate, no problem.
In French, but if you use this, you will see that there are a lot of things that doesn't work. I know.
I'm sure.
So that has to be modified. You will discover that there are a lot of characteristics that should be added, or added which are of no interest. You see?
Well, and we assume that
what we are asking
from
to you to do is to make a survey sheet that works for you and to test it in 10, 15 buildings. That's all. So, we correct your work via internet, via Skype, with systems that Filippo Boschi will tell you. Filippo will be here the rest 2 days, you know, because this is envisioned, forecasted during your exit field exercise that will be carried out within now and February, March, let's say. We will have email long distance, you say, contacts, you know, and corrections. And then I will be back here in March to discuss with you the results of your exercise.
And maybe more, because I found on ArcGIS online service, we can subscribe and we can share maps, for example, in a folders and have a...
If you want.
I use this
yes,
for
some. But Filippo will tell you how to deal with the GIS.
ArcGIS online. ArcGIS online.
I don't think that the program got a real GIS software, but we can do that with Excel and and Access. To use a software that you usually have in your computer or the office, and then something that we have to solve this afternoon with no, in the next few days with Cristina and with the help of Pascal to identify some blocks here in Norada and one block in Arar. Today there are not the guys of Arar that are not here, but Monday next day they should be there to make this test. 10, 12, 15 buildings, no more than this. I think that is absolutely reasonable. Once you have defined your survey sheet, normally the survey sheet are meant for a survey from outside, without entering the building.
This is the problem in Norada. It's a big issue with entering.
No. You don't need to enter the building.
Yes.
You don't need to enter the building. It can be useful to enter some higher building next to your block to see the building from above. This could be a bell tower, or this could be...
very difficult here in Norada.
I know. No, because one evaluation
just push you out.
Interesting is the evaluation of the roof, for instance. It may be, because the deterioration of a building very often starts from the roof. You know, and especially in countries like here, where I think the roof has, in many cases, has a timber structure.
Yes.
So that's very easy. Well, it's true that here you have a pitch roof like that can be seen even from the street.
From the ground, yeah.
From the ground. But in some cases it can be useful if you manage to have a look to the roof from above or from the same height. But for the rest, everything can be done from outside, differently from the Italian case where we have this problem of ensuring the ratio between inhabitants or workers, working places and cars, you know. You don't need to count the number of inhabitants or to count the number of working places, because in Italy we have to do that. We have to relate the master plan to the census, and since the census occurs every 10 years, in many cases we have to update the census. Very luckily the municipalities have a very efficient say anagraphe, I don't know the word in English, but I mean, we need that, but you don't need to do that part. So you don't need to ask anyone how many families live there. You can, well, it can be useful, for instance, to count the number of beds, you know, in order to see how many apartments you may have in a block, for instance. But this is just enough to count the number of beds. You're not obliged to ask anyone, please, how many families live here in what? So this is to say that you are asked to to structure a survey form than to test it. Just to see how it happens, you know. And just to see that, and in the while to update the base map we will have. Next Wednesday, someone of the municipality will be here, and so presumably we will know what kind of base map we can use to identify the buildings. Because I insist on this very point, it's very important to identify the buildings, because without this identification, no GIS is possible. So, this is the kind of exercise. But Cristina and Filippo will talk about that more in detail than me. This is just an introduction to the and you will see it's not difficult. It's simply boring. But it's a matter that deserves discussion among you. That's why we think that we should work in small teams. 2, preferably 3 persons. So, do you have any other questions? No. You are, I killed you, did I manage to kill you, all of you? Huh? No. So we are very resistant. So,